Et voilà. Alors, c'est parti. Aujourd'hui, on parle de l'évaluation de l'écriture dans le cours de ELA, 9e année à 12e année. Puis, d'après ce que j'ai compris, puis on va faire un petit tour de table. La plupart des enseignants qui enseignent ELA, surtout au secondaire, vont l'enseigner de la 7e à la 12e année. Parfois, c'est 7 à 9 et 10 à 12, mais dans des petites écoles, c'est ça qui nous arrive. On va enchaîner avec, comme j'ai dit, l'hommage, la reconnaissance territoriale. Pardon, alors nous reconnaissons que nous souhaitons profiter de l'occasion pour souligner le fait que les participants dans cette rencontre virtuelle se retrouvent sur les territoires des traités 6, 7 et 8, des lieux de rencontre et de déplacement traditionnels des Premières Nations, ainsi que sur les territoires des Métis en Alberta. Et nous sommes très reconnaissants envers les gardiens de savoir traditionnels et les aînés, ceux qui sont toujours parmi nous comme ceux qui nous ont précédés. Nous reconnaissons ces terres en guise d'acte de réconciliation et pour exprimer notre gratitude envers ceux dont le territoire est l'endroit où nous résidons ou que nous visitons. Le Consortium provincial francophone s'engage à accompagner notre communauté dans ce processus de réconciliation et de guérison collective. Alors, je vais juste arrêter rapidement le partage de mon écran parce que ce que j'aimerais faire, c'est vraiment de vous partager tout de suite la présentation. Et pourquoi je fais ça? Ben, c'est parce que il y a plein de liens dans la présentation, dont le lien pour le dossier que j'ai partagé avec vous. Pour déposer vos échantillons. OK, on est dans le chat ici. J'espère que ça fonctionne. Oui, et vous m'avez envoyé des échantillons. Et je vois que Liz, la seule chose qui me manquait, j'ai lu ton courriel, j'ai 3 échantillons, je ne savais juste pas quel niveau tu avais ciblé. What grades do you teach, Liz? Or what are the samples from?
The samples are from my grade 10, 11, and 12 class.
Okay. And so are they all grade 10 samples? Do you remember? Like there's an excellent, satisfactory, and weak.
I believe the excellent was grade 10. The satisfactory was grade 11. And the week was also grade 11.
Okay. So what I'm going to do before we continue is to put those in our shared dossier. Ça va juste me prendre un peu de temps parce qu'il y a quand même un chemin à suivre. Échantillon d'écriture. Voilà. Ça, c'est 10e. Alors, I'm creating a shortcut to them in this drive because they're all in the drive as it is. Partagez avec moi. Désolée, ça prend quelques petites minutes, mais je voulais placer tout ça pour justement faire le travail nécessaire qu'on va faire aujourd'hui. Alors, le but, échantillon d'écriture, ça c'est 11e, merveilleux. Le but aujourd'hui, c'est vraiment d'avoir des pratiques communes, d'avoir un consensus quand ça vient à l'évaluation de l'écriture. Et c'est une formation que j'ai faite, j'ai été inspirée, disons, par le temps que j'ai passé au ministère. Puis par ça, je veux dire, pendant l'été, début d'été, on se rassemble à quelque part à Edmonton pour corriger les textes des élèves. Donc, les parties A, je crois que c'est les parties A. Et je l'ai fait pour 9e année. Ça fait plusieurs années, mais je dirais que c'était ma meilleure formation jusqu'à date parce que ça m'a permis vraiment de comprendre c'est quoi un texte satisfaisant, c'est quoi un texte excellent, puis quels éléments de chaque texte. Quand on le décortique comme ça nous permet vraiment de voir, ah, OK, c'est vrai, je n'avais pas pensé à ça. Donc, quand on considère, OK, l'orthographe, la grammaire, tous les éléments d'un texte, le contenu, mais il faut en discuter ensemble pour s'assurer que on fait bien ça. Alors, je vais juste placer le tout dernier. Tu m'as dit 11e. All right. Et voilà. C'est là. OK. On est prêt. Alors, je vais repartager mon écran. On va passer par... Ah, non, pas celui-là. Celui-là. Merveilleux. Ouais. Alors, comme j'ai dit, on va faire un petit tour de table. Je pense que je vous connais tous, toutes, dans le fond. Il n'y a pas d'hommes ici aujourd'hui. Mais je vais commencer avec une petite introduction de moi-même. Je me présente, je suis Barbra. Je suis employée du Franco-Sud, mais en prêt de service avec le Consortium. Ça fait maintenant ma 2e année. Par le passé, j'ai enseigné plein de matières, entre autres ELA. C'est drôle parce que j'ai commencé à enseigner l'anglais seulement lorsque je suis arrivée à Calgary. Quand j'étais au Québec, j'ai enseigné plein d'autres affaires, surtout les mathématiques, études sociales. Mais rendu ici, on m'avait besoin pour enseigner l'anglais. Parfait, ça m'a fait du plaisir. J'ai même passé 1 année à enseigner l'anglais en 10e année. Alors, pourquoi je vous dis ça? C'est parce que je ne suis pas experte du tout. J'adore enseigner, puis j'adore enseigner l'anglais pour plusieurs raisons. J'aime beaucoup l'idée que je peux infuser beaucoup d'autres thèmes dans le cours d'une langue, comme le français ou l'anglais. Alors, tu sais, ça m'a beaucoup intéressée. Puis j'ai adoré les discussions que j'ai eues avec mes élèves et lire leurs textes parce qu'on voit très bien leur façon de penser puis comment ils mettent leurs idées sur papier. Alors, c'est quelque chose que j'ai beaucoup aimé. Et je passe la parole à toi, Liz. Up to you to introduce yourself. Tell us where you work, what grades you teach.
I work in Brooks at Le Colosso. I teach grade 9, I teach all the way from grade 1 to grade 12. So I have all of the high school and all of the elementary.
And I'm going to ask you, Liz, how you find that having the entire school basically as an English specialist, right? Because that's what you end up being. And how do you find that progression for you?
I am thoroughly enjoying it because if I see a deficit in my older students, I can go to my younger classes and start introducing things that my older kids clearly haven't got. Mm-hmm. And I can choose to start at grade 1, or if I feel like this is a skill that maybe needs to be introduced at grade 3. So every year I get to build on things that I've already taught. Right now, I've only been teaching here since March 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I see a lot of things in my high school students that I'm like, okay, I need to make sure I'm teaching grammar and spelling rules and some stuff like that. Yeah, organization in writing, like all of this stuff needs to be taught explicitly.
Yeah, and that's the benefit of having the younger kids and seeing them through. So that's great. I mean, there are disadvantages as well, right? Same teacher year after year. Sometimes, you know, we don't know if they're not getting it because they just don't understand our explanations, but, you know, it's got its great advantages too. I'm glad you're enjoying that. Marie-Ève, c'est à ton tour.
Bonjour, moi j'enseigne à Cochrane, à Notre-Dame-des-Vallées. J'enseigne l'anglais et les études sociales pour les élèves de la 7e à la 11e année, parce qu'on n'a pas encore de 12e année, mais ça s'en vient l'an prochain. C'est ça.
C'est ça justement, dans des petites écoles, quand on fait grandir l'école, on attend que nos cours passent d'une année à l'autre. Fait que j'ai hâte pour vous à Cochrane d'avoir vos premiers finissants. Ah, mais j'imagine, oui. Y avait-tu juste un élève en 11e cette année ou plusieurs?
Non, juste une.
Juste une, OK, c'est ça. Fait que ça va être la finissante l'année prochaine. C'est super. Ben, bienvenue aujourd'hui. Et à toi, Nicole?
Moi, c'est Nicole Walliser. J'enseigne à l'école héritage à Falaire. J'enseigne l'anglais vraiment depuis que je suis à l'école héritage. J'enseigne la 7 à la 12. J'étais en direction depuis les 16 dernières années, donc je retourne en salle de classe à temps plein. Donc, j'ai toujours enseigné la 9 à 12, mais là, on a ajouté à mon horaire 7 et 8.
Ah, génial!
Et donc, c'est ça, je retourne en salle de classe car je suis à l'aube de ma carrière et je voulais juste faire ça un petit peu au ralenti, si on peut dire que la salle de classe est au ralenti, là. On se comprend, ça ne l'est pas, mais de ma perspective, ça l'est.
Ben, ça change de rythme, c'est sûr. J'ai fait les deux. J'ai travaillé en direction, j'ai travaillé en salle de classe. Puis là, comme consultante, donc, tu sais, j'ai vu un peu de tout. C'est vrai, c'est pas au ralenti, mais on peut dire que l'environnement a changé. Le rythme a changé, puis nos objectifs changent dans ce cas-là. Fait que, bienvenue à tout le monde. I hope, Liz, that in my speaking French, you'll be able to, but you know what? I'll do a lot of translating. We're working on English anyway, so a lot of that's going to come out.
Est-ce que, Barbara?
Oui.
Est-ce que c'est le Consortium qui veut vraiment que la formation soit en français? Parce que moi, ça ne me dérange vraiment pas d'y aller en anglais, là. Parce que je voudrais que Liz profite au maximum, puis on est tous des profs d'anglais, à part si dans vos protocoles, vous n'avez pas le... OK.
On a rien comme ça dans nos protocoles,
Okay.
justement.
So, I mean, I'm good if we roll,
Okay.
même si c'est en français sur les diapos, we go in English. Like, let's not be silly about
Perfect.
this. Okay.
Great. I'm glad you're all on board. That's perfect. We did this for the new curriculum, right? So when we met, I remember, Liz, that my presentations, they'll be in French, but, you know, a lot of the documents at any rate are in English. So we'll continue like this. My translation in my head will go from, like, I might pause and look for my words, but you'll get it. So our goal today really is to take the program of studies, the curriculum that we have, or the curricula that we have, also using rubrics, the rubrics that exist already, and we can talk about our own rubrics as well. What's copy tip in English? So the ones that are on the Alberta Education website for grades 9 and 12, right, that come out of the central correcting. And then your own samples that you've sent to me. And we're gonna analyze all of this. And that's the point of our discussions today. We're gonna watch about a 10-minute video on feedback, right? So we know how important feedback can be, and especially when it comes to writing, feedback is a major component. So we'll watch this quick video. It is in French. I do apologize, Liz, but at the same time, I think you'll get the concepts, and in our discussions anyway, all the concepts will come out. And then the majority of our time will be spent, and normally I would put you into breakout rooms, but we're such a small group, we'll do this all together, which will actually help in the video that we're now creating, because essentially, if you were all in breakout rooms, I'd stop the video, the recording, and move on. But this way we can record all the way through, and anybody who isn't here today will be able to benefit from some of the work that we're going to do together. When we finish up at the end, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go over with you some of the perceived needs that you have and what we can do in terms of next steps. So this wouldn't be necessarily our last and our only workshop. I'd like to continue. I'll ask you about the timing of that, when we could start working on that, and how many sessions we would like to see together to move forward and really give you all the support that you need at high school level, that we don't often get, right? A lot of our supports are for elementary. And I know we've heard very clearly, and I know because high school is my domain, that we don't get a lot of support, and we're often in our own little bubble, teaching our own little subjects, and we make do on our own. And because in the francophone world, our schools are so small, we end up having an English specialist who works all by themselves. Part of my goal today was to bring you together to network with each other, to pass on ideas, resources, and to have these discussions, these rich discussions that will help us move on. And the Drive file that I'm using is linked in here. So it's always accessible to you to put your files in, your sample texts that I asked for, and also to look at each other's sample texts, because what you've determined already is your excellent, your satisfactory, and your weaker texts. Well, we're going to look at those and we're going to decide together, oh yeah, well, maybe this element would have made it more proficient as opposed to excellent. And so using those terms are going to be really important, and then using the rubrics will become really important, because it gives us the language and the basis and the proof that we need to really put our judgment down on paper. And like I said, feedback is so very important. And knowing just how important it is according to John Hattie's meta-analyses, well, that's why it's so important to look at that together. Okay. Moving on, and just so you know, I chose this little image here because we all are in the same boat. And if we're all rowing in the same direction, it makes things go a lot quicker, a lot easier. We'll feel a lot more efficient in our work. And so here I've linked in the program of studies for, well, it's K to 9, and then 10, 11, and 12. And there are support documents from Alberta Education for K to 9 and then 10 to 12. So as I click on these, actually back up, I've put them in here for you. And I've done a lot of studying of the particular learning outcomes that we have in ELA, but I also studied them in Français. And what I find very interesting about the structure of these programs of study is that in French, we have a tendency to, put things in a nice table and align them so that we know we see the progression. What do my students from kindergarten to grade 9 need to master to move on to the next grade, and how that's all scaffolded? In the English program of studies, I find we don't have that visual in the same way. And so I'm gonna show you a document that I ended up finding. And I personally like checklists. It helps me to plan. It helps me to see things in a bigger picture kind of way. And the big picture, I think, is important to start with and then move into specific learning outcomes. So as this document loads, apparently it was created by a beginning teacher, so fresh out of university, and she decided she needed help with all of the outcomes. And what the other thing I noticed is that for each general outcome, it always starts with students will listen, speak, read, write, view, and represent, ... right? And this is where, what are they going to do with that? And so writing is a part of each general outcome in some way. And so I couldn't really tease out specific learning outcomes from a general outcome that's just about writing. Right? It's pervasive through the whole program. And it's logical because, of course, we need to do a lot of learning and a lot of manipulating and working with in order to master certain concepts. So here it is in a one-page is it 2? Yeah, so it's just over 1 page of learning outcomes, just broken down by general outcome. I don't know if you've seen this before. No, okay. I find it particularly helpful, but at the same time, as I go back, you'll see the program of studies over what, 100 pages or more, right? It's long. It's not something you're using day to day, and it's not something you're using to plan necessarily. And so I want to be able to make sure you have all the tools that are fairly easy to use for you to move forward. And so using that as our jumping off point, we're also looking at les ressources d'appui, so the supports. So as I click on this next link, the support documents that are there, and I think I'm in English, yeah, are the things that we do absolutely need. What are the authorized novels that I can use, and the nonfiction? What films can I show? Those are all things that I need to know as I'm teaching in my classroom. And so that's all there. There's no change to this anytime soon. So I'm curious to know, you know, at some point we could talk about all these supports that exist. There's also Learn Alberta in terms of other resources that we may be looking at. You know, English ELA is not a course where there's a textbook and you move forward. You're putting a lot of things together. And then the question then becomes, okay, so I've planned and I've gotten my resources, and here I have a unit, and then I have my long-term plan based on all my units and my themes. But then I have to create my own rubrics. I have to create my own evaluations. And so to make it all very simple, that's why we're focusing just on the writing today. And like I said, we'll talk at the end about our other needs. Am I going to need more resources, more evaluation support for reading? Am I going to need it in other domains? So was it the day before yesterday? The French teachers got together in this very same way, and they talked a lot about their needs. And I'll give you a little insight, maybe it might inspire you as well. They talked a lot about plagiarism. And I read an article this morning on an AI that exists that allows students to put in certain criteria, and they can pop out a text like that, not written by themselves. It was quite interesting. And so there's a big challenge in determining what's been plagiarized and how it's been plagiarized. So that was one of their needs that they mentioned yesterday. I'm just going to go through my list as Margot went over it with me. Grammar was another one, how to best integrate that, how we can get students to apply their grammatical knowledge into their writing, how they can improve their writing that way. And of course, with French, we worry about les anglicismes. We're not so worried about that in ELA. Our students generally have a better oral basis in English language. Not always the case, but often in Alberta. Feedback. So they were talking about technological tools that could be used to help with the feedback part of it. We talked about Moat and Loom and Showbiz and other kinds of digital portfolios that might exist, and that might be interesting. Margot and I also touched on how we can share with all of you the things that we might put together or that we can put together as a team, and using boards in New Learn Alberta may be one way to go. So we'll discuss that, and we'll see how we can provide you with the best platform to move forward. Also, like I mentioned earlier, the progression over time of what students are supposed to master. That's another challenge that we can sometimes see. And like I've just mentioned in the program of studies, because it's large and sometimes vague, it's hard to have very clear expectations in place for ourselves and for our students. So I think those were just a few of the challenges and needs expressed. And like I said, we'll touch on that later on and look at how we can best support you at the consortium to move forward. All right, and as we go through our process of working together, these are the types of things I've put linked into the presentation. So as we deal with ministerial exams in grade 9 and grade 12, there is already a set rubric that exists, one for the functional and one for narrative type of writing. And les copies types are there as well in these files, these drive files. So the functional and the narrative. I've just included one of each, but on the Alberta Education website, there are several. And you possibly already have those in your own files. That was the kind of thing I always had at hand because I was always working towards that. We can also discuss provincial exams and how to move forward with them. It's always an interesting discussion and always interesting to hear people's opinion. So the same thing with grade 12 diploma exams. There are the rubrics for 30-1 and 30-2, and also examples of student writing. And like I said, in those examples of student writing, they really have detailed and taken apart each example at each level. And that's the kind of thing we want to imitate today. That's the kind of thing we want to work on together with our students at any level. So even if, we're talking about grade 7 and 8, although we're not talking about that today, all of this will apply to them. And I can make sure that for your 7s and 8s, if it's interesting to you, I can provide you with the rubrics and the copy tip from those levels as well, because that would be part of the banque d'examen commun created at au Centre Nord. So I don't have access, but there are consultants that I work with that do. And then the guide de notation, so the scoring guides for 10-1, 10-2, 20-1, and 20-2. Those are some, very particular, right? Critical response, literary exploration, and the persuasive response in grade 11, which will help us to correct our own students' work. And again, this is really just the link to that file that I mentioned earlier. Pardon me. I'm just going to open it up to show you the layout so that when you go in, you're not lost, right? I know with a drive file, I can easily get lost in the rabbit hole. So within these 4 files, you will also have the copy tip, right? So if it's grade 9 or grade 12, not necessarily the case for grades 10 and 11, because those are not ministerial exams, not provincial exams. Sorry about the wait. When I'm on Zoom, it takes a little longer. We'll get there. All right. So some writing samples. I'm going to click on this one, the character analysis for grade 9. And some of them are going to be links to another Google file, or there will be files that I downloaded directly into this particular file. All right. So like I said, I had asked for no names, no comments, which is great. You've probably already corrected all of yours. Obviously, you were able to put a word to it, satisfactory. But as we look at these together, we can decide together, is this really satisfactory? And if it is, and it most likely is, why is it satisfactory? We'll pick it apart and see what makes it a satisfactory text so that we know we have exemplars, we're creating a bank of them. And in our heads, we can say for this next piece of writing that my grade 9 student is going to do, oh, that's satisfactory. And I can tell you why. Here are the examples from the text itself. All right, and as we move on, this is the little video I wanted to show you. And I'm hoping my sound works. I might have to unplug my headphones. But as we talk about feedback, I hope you'll see at what point feedback is the most important element in this whole process. My daughter came home yesterday with her own piece of writing. She's only in grade 6. But the rubric was very clearly, you know, attached to her piece of writing. And you can see how her teacher sort of picked out different elements of her text and matched it to the rubric and said, well, this is where you did well, and this is what that means, right in the language that the students speak. But without further hesitation, let's see if I can get this to play for us. Maybe. There we go. Yeah. It'll just take a minute. I don't want to build a website, sorry. All right. I'll stop the share and start over with that. It's on its way. Can you hear it? No? Okay.
Actually, Barbara, we see you now again. We don't see the video.
Oh, hang on. I can't hear now. Pardon me, Nicole?
We see you on the screen and we don't see the video anymore. And right?
Yep, that's perfect. I just wanted to know if you could hear it and you couldn't. So now I'm going to switch it over. We're going to show, I'm going to show you my screen.
Ben, peut-être aussi qu'est-ce que c'est la rétroaction active et comment elle se vit.
La rétroaction, dans le fond, pour être capable de l'expliquer comme il faut, je dois faire un retour en arrière.
Oui.
Je trouvais que je corrigeais trop. Je trouvais que je n'avais pas assez d'impact sur les élèves. Alors, il y a plusieurs années, j'ai commencé à beaucoup me re-questionner sur ma façon de communiquer avec eux. Et c'est justement ça de la rétroaction. C'est d'engager le dialogue avec l'étudiant pour qu'il soit conscient de ses forces, mais qu'il soit aussi conscient de ses faiblesses, de ses difficultés, de ce qu'il a amélioré. Et ces dernières années, il y a plusieurs outils technologiques notamment qui ont complètement changé la donne, ne serait-ce que les portfolios numériques, ne serait-ce que des plateformes qui nous permettent de recevoir plusieurs types de travaux différents, qui vont faire en sorte que ce qui était très difficile avant, de donner de la rétroaction avant, pendant, alors qu'on se contentait souvent d'en donner seulement après. Avec un examen, bien, ces plateformes nous permettent d'engager une discussion avec les élèves et de donner de la rétroaction avant et pendant. Et c'est là où ça devient tout un levier pédagogique. D'apprendre à maîtriser ces outils numériques-là que peuvent être, pour le moment sur le marché, il y a beaucoup CISA, il y a Showbie, il y a Classroom, il y a Teams avec Microsoft, il y a d'autres joueurs qui commencent à faire leur entrée, tels que Socrative est quand même là depuis longtemps, Flipgrid, Vidéo. Il y a plein d'outils que si les enseignants maîtrisent ces outils numériques-là, ils vont être capables d'engager au quotidien la discussion avec leurs élèves. Ils vont être capables de bénéficier de ces très beaux leviers-là pour amener les élèves plus haut. Ils vont être capables également d'aider, d'engager les élèves dans leurs apprentissages et éventuellement, c'est l'évaluation qui finit par changer. Ouais. Parce que quand on apprend à engager la discussion avec les élèves, on finit par tellement les connaître. Quand on apprend à bien organiser ses traces, que ce soit numérique ou via le numérique organiser des traces papier, on en vient à être capable de modifier notre évaluation et surtout d'évaluer mieux et moins. La raison en effort simple, c'est comme on a plusieurs traces, bien, on peut diminuer le nombre d'évaluations parce qu'on est capable de justifier notre jugement professionnel et de rendre compte des progrès des élèves. Fait que c'est ça pour moi la rétroaction active. C'est de documenter, oui, pour le bien de l'élève, pour que ce soit un levier, mais également pour moi, pour m'aider dans mon jugement professionnel. Alors, voilà, c'est ça pour moi la rétroaction.
Puis là, aujourd'hui, qu'est-ce qu'ils ont vécu comme expérience, les enseignants? Parce que je pense que vous avez commencé, ou vous avez eu à un moment donné une discussion sur le droit à l'erreur aussi. Donc, qu'est-ce qui est vécu en ce moment là, par les participants aujourd'hui? Là?
Il y a plusieurs participants qui sont sortis, nous ont dit à la fin de l'après-midi, OK, on est secoués. On est vraiment, on est secoué, on va réfléchir. Alors, on avait axé la formation aujourd'hui, dans le fond, avec 2 axes. On explorait tout le volet de la rétroaction, mais en même temps, on découvrait des outils qui pouvaient nous permettre de donner de la rétroaction. Alors, ce matin, on a commencé par se questionner sur ce qu'est la rétroaction. On a découvert ce que nous, on a appelé, nous autres, les 4 commandements de la rétroaction. On s'est ensuite questionné.
Hey, tu peux-tu nous les dire, les 4 commandements de la rétroaction? Parce que je trouve ça intéressant.
Là, oui, il y en a beaucoup. On pourrait faire des jours sur la rétroaction.
Ben,
hein. Mais la rétroaction, elle doit être rapide
ouais.
tout au long du processus.
Ouais.
Elle doit être efficace.
Ouais.
Elle doit être aussi gentille. Et on a mis l'image du sandwich. Les
oui.
enfants dans la vidéo de Austin's Butterfly, si jamais vous l'avez déjà vu, des jeunes enfants de 4e année vont se prononcer. La rétroaction doit être honnête sans être méchante. Alors, on va parler de rétroaction gentille à ce moment-là. Et la rétroaction doit aussi être précise. Alors, on a regardé ça. On a regardé à quel moment la faire. Alors, avant, pendant, après. Ce matin, on a exploré des outils comme Shobi et Sisa, les portfolios numériques qui nous permettent de documenter. Puis cet après-midi, on s'est attaqué au droit à l'erreur.
Ouais.
Alors, avec des outils tels que Flipgrid, Vidéo, Spiral, on a parlé du droit à l'erreur. On s'est servi de ces plateformes-là pour nous échanger. Il y avait un consensus.
On a-tu le droit?
Oui, tout le monde s'entendait pour dire qu'on a droit à l'erreur.
Ouais.
Mais quand on a posé la deuxième question, mais on fait quoi après? Oui, on a le droit à l'erreur, mais on est quand même coincé dans une classe, il y a des limites de temps et tout. Qu'est-ce que l'on fait? Alors, on a discuté là-dessus. Puis, on n'a pas la prétention d'avoir trouvé la réponse. Mais on s'est entendu que si on veut agir là-dessus, il faut revoir nos façons d'enseigner.
Ouais.
Si on a le droit à l'erreur, c'est parce qu'on doit avoir du temps pour se reprendre. Alors, ça demande de peut-être replanifier sa gestion de cours. Si on a le droit à l'erreur, ça veut dire que rapidement, notre enseignant doit nous signifier qu'on est dans l'erreur, nous ramener dans la bonne voie. Alors, c'est à travers des outils qui peuvent nous permettre d'aller récolter rapidement ce que les élèves font, ce que les élèves pensent aussi, qu'on s'est pratiqué à être bon pour aller cerner ce qui se passe dans nos classes et être capable de les encadrer du mieux qu'on peut, puis de ramener tout ça dans la bonne voie pour que tout le monde progresse.
Ouais.
C'est ce qu'on a fait.
Voilà. Vraiment, merci Maude d'avoir partagé, d'avoir proposé cette thématique-là pour les participants du Créacan, puis pour les enseignants qui nous écoutent et qui n'ont pas eu la chance de vivre, puis que tu as intéressé par les réflexions et les propos que tu as apportés aujourd'hui. Comment est-ce qu'ils peuvent se questionner encore? Est-ce qu'il y a des sources à proposer d'informations pour travailler cette rétroaction-là ou tout simplement de commencer à creuser les différents outils dont tu as parlé? Qu'est-ce qui sera un bon premier pas pour eux finalement?
Bien, 2 choses. Et de se renseigner sur la rétroaction. Il existe de bonnes ressources dont je pourrais vous partager les liens sur lesquels les enseignants pourront aller cliquer.
Avec plaisir.
Comprendre la rétroaction, ce qu'elle est, ça demeure assez facile. Alors, c'est expliqué dans un langage qui est vraiment à la portée de tous. Là où la difficulté va venir, une fois qu'on a compris la rétroaction, c'est de quelle façon est-ce que je peux appliquer ces principes-là avec lesquels tout le monde est d'accord au quotidien. Ouais. Et là, j'encouragerais les enseignants à déjà faire une analyse. Qu'est-ce qu'ils font? De quelle façon travaillent-ils? Permettent-ils le droit à l'erreur? Est-ce que les élèves ont le temps de se reprendre? De regarder également leur façon de travailler et d'aller explorer des plateformes numériques, de consulter leurs collègues. Vous, comment est-ce que vous interagissez avec votre classe? Est-ce que vous avez des outils qui peuvent me permettre de les essayer aussi? De mettre les élèves de notre côté. Par exemple, la première fois que j'ai utilisé certains outils, je le verbalisais aux élèves. C'est la première fois que je l'utilise, je manque de pratique. Parce qu'on ne se le cachera pas, c'est bien beau d'utiliser un outil seul dans son bureau, mais après ça, quand on arrive avec un groupe, là, il y a une autre étape à franchir. Bien, quand on met les élèves de notre côté dès le départ, quand on se place en posture d'apprenant, en compagnie d'apprenants, bien après, c'est là qu'on décolle. Fait qu'il faut faire 2 choses. Aller lire, puis en même temps accepter de se pratiquer avec les outils. Mais ce qu'il faut savoir, c'est que tout le temps qu'on va investir à maîtriser ces outils numériques-là, ils vont après aller être un catalyseur incroyable pour notre intention pédagogique qui est, elle, de donner de la rétroaction. Alors, ces deux-là vont de pair, doivent se construire et ça va donner des beaux changements dans la gestion classe. Et c'est pas toujours à l'enseignant de donner de la rétroaction. Les pairs peuvent donner de la rétroaction.
Ouais.
L'élève peut se donner de la rétroaction aussi. Alors, c'est également une façon de rendre l'élève responsable dans ses apprentissages, ne serait-ce qu'avec un flipgrid, ne serait-ce qu'avec un commentaire audio dans un portfolio numérique.
Ouais.
Où as-tu de la difficulté? On travaille la métacognition. On force l'élève à prendre un recul par rapport à ce qu'il fait. Et c'est étonnant de voir à quel point ils ont besoin de temps. La créativité a besoin de temps. Bien, apprendre à faire de la rétroaction, apprendre à prendre une distance et avoir un regard juste par rapport à l'apprenant qu'on est, ça demande du temps.
Ouais.
Mais je pense que c'est un beau cadeau à leur faire parce qu'ils vont être des apprenants à vie ensuite.
Oui.
On le sait dans le monde actuel.
Oui, les enseignants
à
apprennent
fait.
continuellement, apprennent de leurs
Oui.
jeunes, apprennent des nouvelles façons d'enseigner, des nouveaux
Oui.
outils, oui.
Oui, puis même les élèves, au 21e siècle, il n'y a aucun jeune qui va quitter nos écoles et qui n'aura jamais besoin de mise à niveau,
Ouais.
peu importe le travail dans lequel il va être.
Ouais.
Alors, nos élèves, on doit leur enseigner à être capable de se remettre en question. Et quand un élève se donne de la rétroaction, c'est très difficile. On est face à soi, on doit prendre une distance, être juste et honnête.
Oui.
Ça demande un entraînement. Fait que
Oui.
c'est tout ça qu'on travaille avec la rétroaction active. L'enseignant qui pose un regard sur l'élève, les autres qui peuvent également poser un regard, mais ultimement l'élève qui pose un regard sur lui aussi. Et tout ça de façon constructive et juste. Et là, on a un beau levier pédagogique.
Oui.
Fait que c'est cool.
Là, je vais pouvoir entendre. Alors, what did you think? Liz, maybe we'll have to break it down a little bit. Nicole, Marie-Ève, what's your take on Maud Lamoure's way of looking at rétroaction, feedback?
Well, I think we probably all do it in small doses. You know, I think of, you know, often I will give, you know, they'll share with me their documents as they're working through. I'll comment and go through it with them, but it's in little doses in terms of the students who solicit my help, you know, then you're helping them. And maybe that's where the element that I recognize that I would have to work on, you know, after listening to her, is that I have to solicit everyone, regardless of those who come forward and share their document during the writing process and not wait till the end. So, you know, whatever way that you evaluate your students, like I never give a mark on first draft writing, regardless. Except that it does require then that I have to go through, you know, all their essays. I read them twice. They get their evaluation on their final draft. But I also, that's where I give them, okay, I'd like you to look at this paragraph. This structure here is a little clumsy. And I think I need to be a little bit more precise because, you know, it's impossible to tell them on every sentence or every paragraph what I mean by clumsy, right? So often I will say, come see me for this section. And I find that when if I don't give them a mark on their first draft, they'll actually they'll correct the spelling, they'll go through it, they'll become better editors. And then they're going to say, Madame, I don't know how to, you know, fix this structure or organize this paragraph. And when I was giving them marks initially, right, even though they could submit for a second review and I would, you know, change the mark accordingly, they wouldn't do it. So now I only correct final draft that I call. So, I mean, like you know, I think it's more that it has to be more planned, like from what I can tell from Maude's presentation there, is that it has to be done, I guess fluidly would be more and more systematically, I think.
Yeah, I think you got a good take on what she had to say there. Because what I've often found, if I'm going to correct student work and I put a mark on the work from the start, they stop there. They think they can't progress, right? They don't put any more effort in. Why? They already got their mark. And I get it. That makes perfect sense. And in fact, there's another video I'll try and find at some point this morning and put it into the chat on Institut TA, right? So we all in Alberta as francophones have access now through le réseau des écoles inclusives to the Institut du trouble d'apprentissage. And I think it's an hour-long webinar that was done with a teacher. She teaches grades 5 and 6, if I recall correctly. So not high school, but her method is very similar to what Maud Lamoureux talks about. And the title of her particular webinar was, I basically don't give marks to my students, and she doesn't all throughout the year until it comes time for the report card. And she talks about the different ways in which she communicates regardless, and how she gives her feedback and what that means to her students. So like I said, I'll put that linked in for you because that might be of interest. It might give you some ideas of how to better structure some of the feedback that you're giving your students. Marie-Ève, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, two things that I found were interesting is one, when she was talking about peers giving feedback, and that's something that I definitely don't implement enough. But that's also related to the other point, which is the question of time. I mean, feedback takes time. I could do like one student's assignment in an entire period if I really wanted to, because I sometimes have a lot to say about things. And if I do want to be precise enough so that I feel that they can then go and improve their work, then that really does take a good amount of time that we don't necessarily have, especially in high school, I find. So it's how to find that balance where you're giving enough feedback, or other students are giving enough feedback for the students to go and improve their work, but not taking too much of that time. But that's still giving them enough time. Yeah, being efficient, but then giving the students enough time as well, because it does give them, it does take time. And I mean, we all know for some students it can take way more time than with others. So I mean, it's always a question of time as well, of how to get everything done in the time that we have.
That's an excellent point. So an example I have of that lack of time this morning at home, even, right? My son's in grade 8. He had to write a texte opinion, right? So this is his first foray into really persuasive writing. And his teacher set him up really well. He's got a good plan, and always starting with a plan it's an excellent strategy. But the time involved in just thinking, processing, reflecting to begin with, you go through the writing process and you think you've already spent as a student so much time on it. And now you've got to go back and spend more time on it, and then go back and spend more time on it. And you're right, it's something that takes a lot of time. And sometimes it makes me wonder how many writing situations we put them in. How many should we do? For students who are in grade 9, at least we've got a full year to cover all of this. But when it comes to grades 10, 11, 12, we have a semester. The time is of the essence. And so I find, yes, her Maude's mention of peer evaluation and self-evaluation can be really, really helpful in that it's teaching students how to assess their own writing. And when they assess their peers' writing, it will only help them assess their own writing and make the corrections necessary as they go through it. But I will point, go ahead, Nicole.
And maybe we're lucky in that respect because we are in small schools. And like Liz was saying, and Marie-Ève, probably the same for both you too, is that we teach, you know, I start teaching those students in grade 7. So if I can tackle that whole idea of, you know, good feedback to my students starting grade 7, 8, 9. And so when I do get to my 30-1s and 30-2s and we're compressed and pushed for time, it should already kind of be in place if we've been doing it consistently. So, and I mean, and we have the privilege of that because we teach our students forever, you know, so, and maybe that's the only way we're going to be able to do it so that we feel like I'm doing it competently and that it's actually benefiting my students, that we have to do a little bit. And by 30, you know, by grade 12, you're thinking, okay, they kind of know the drill there a little bit.
And by the time, we hope that by the time they hit 30, 30-1, 30-2, all the pieces that they've learned are going to come together, because I think it's important so that we're not burning ourselves out and burning our students out, and not like, so they come to a point where they don't want to write, or that it's more of a chore than an interest for them. Breaking down our objectives. So what do I want my grade 7 students to absolutely master by the time they end grade 7 in terms of just their writing? And then you do the same through grades 8, 9, and so on. So hopefully every little bit of the puzzle is laid out for them, and they're just learning to amalgamate it all together by the time they reach the higher grades. So I'm going to put something else up on the screen that had me thinking so much this morning. Oh my goodness. La rétroaction est censée être plus de travail pour le récepteur que pour le donneur. So feedback, and this is a translation from Dylan William, who's all about assessment. Feedback is supposed to be more work for the person receiving the feedback than for the person giving the feedback. And I'm going to repeat this in my head over and over, because it should be more work for them and less work for us. We have very many students sitting in front of us. They're managing one person, and that should be their sole focus, but our focus is everywhere at once. That's powerful. I think that's very, very powerful. It's how do we get there? You know, how do we make sure our students are working harder on their own writing situations than we are? Okay, so we've had time to reflect. We've had time to look some things over. We will have more time right now to look things over together. And because you teach all of these levels and you've given me all of your samples that I've asked for, we can also consider other samples that you may have. We could just consider the questions that you'll have, but we're going to do this work together. Okay, so in using the programs of study, in using the samples of writing that we've brought with us and the copy tip that we have from Alberta Education, using the rubrics that we have that we've been giving, we're going to just evaluate, look over quickly, or at least talk about the program of studies. What are the learning outcomes? What's going to be assessed, and what are we observing, right? Those are very related, but two different actions. And so in the feedback, when do we give it? How do we give it? How often do we give it? This is what we've been talking about. And as we go through the process of assessment, when we use the rubrics, analyzing the samples, using the rubrics is what we're supposed to be doing. But it's coming to a consensus among us. That's the real work today, right? We want to come to a consensus of, okay, here's a sample of writing. This is the rubric we're using. If we all go away and sit down and reflect on this sample writing using the rubric, what would I say? How would I classify this piece of work? Would it be satisfactory? Would it be proficient? Would it be excellent? Where would it be and why? So let's use these copy tip that we have in grades 9, grade 12 to help us come to that consensus. And then just in the teaching of writing, we can talk about the process of teaching, our planning, the resources we use, the practice we have in our classrooms. I mean, the whole goal for me every time I give a workshop is for you to feel competent so that your student success is at the forefront, and that's what you're aiming for. So that's what I'm aiming for. So that's what the work together today is meant to give us. Are there any questions before we get down and dirty with it? No?
Barbara, have you ever been to corrected like the English 30? Have you ever gone?
Not English 30, only English 9.
Okay,
Yep.
okay. I did the diplomas 1 year 30-1. And like, you know, as a, you know, they always say, your principal always says, you know, it's a really good PD. Well, it really is a good PD. For me as teaching it, and I mean, it really validated where I felt like I was, you know, even just reading it without the rubric and putting it in the rubric for the student to engage, like you really develop that sense of, I'm on the right track. I can recognize a proficient. I can recognize it. I mean, you know, you mark 200, I think each person marks about, I think it's about 60 copies a day for 7 days. You get really good at it. So, but it is quite an interesting learning curve.
Professional, it's an interesting, it's one of the best professional developments that I've ever done. And there's no one person who's giving a workshop. You're not spending any time in a webinar. That is not at all how it works. You go there, you sit down, you're assigned a team, and in your team, you go through the process using student exemplars of, okay, read it. You determine based on the rubrics where you would place this using your own professional judgment. And then you discuss with your colleagues and you argue until you come to a consensus on that is why this particular sample of writing is considered this level. And that exactly was the richest PD I've ever had. It's something I often, I suggest, especially for you new teachers, but any level. By the end of it, you've corrected, well, easily 200 or 1,000, something ridiculous like that in the 5 days that you're there. And so, it's a lot of reading, but you become an expert. And I felt like an expert at the end. And that's saying a lot. I don't feel like an expert in anything. That's saying quite a lot. So my hope for today, just like Margot's was on Tuesday with her group teaching Français, was to really get into it in that same way. I know we're only, 4 of us here, but there's so much experience among the 4 of us here. We've spent so much time with our students, with their writing at many different levels that we know what we're expecting. Today is to confirm what we really know. And to put words to what we're doing so that when we come out with a judgment, a professional judgment, it's based very clearly in the rubrics that we're using with the student work that we have. Okay, we can pull it right out of the student work. And I think, we'll do that. And then when we come back, that's the discussion we'll have. I'm going to stop the sharing of my screen. So that we can get into it. Like I said, there are only a few of us here. I will give everybody co-host rights in case anybody would like to share their screen at any time, because this is really a collaborative session. I've said almost as much as I'm going to say. That's that's where I am, because I'm not the expert. You're the experts. And so let me ask you, what level shall we start with? Do we want to start with 9? Does everybody teach 9 to 12? I think so, eh? Yeah, perfect. So if we wanted to start with 9 and work our way up to 12 or work backwards, either way, we can start wherever you like.
Is it okay, Barbara, if we take just a little 5-minute break?
Oh, what a great idea.
I got into my car at 6:30 this morning and now I'm feeling it.
Now you're feeling it. Okay.
Yes.
Why don't we take more than 5 minutes? Why don't we take a good 15 minutes?
Okay.
Move around, get another coffee, go to the washroom, and I will see you here at 10:15.
Thank you, Barbara.
Perfect. Bon, je vais reprendre l'enregistrement. Ah. Je suis rendue dans les documents de travail. Alors, je vais juste partager mon écran encore pour revoir ce qu'on doit faire, just to see what we're going to do. There we go. Okay. So normally here I would start with one of two things. Either the program of studies or documents like scoring guides. Where would you like to, what angle would you like to take for starters? We go into the program of studies. I'm going to focus more on this document. And so as we look at the program of studies and all the learning outcomes, of course, there are all these concepts that our students need to start to master as their writing becomes better. I have more of a tendency to start with the rubrics, to start with the scoring guides. Those help me to really determine how I'm going to approach my corrections and my feedback. So in doing that and using those documents, I'll start with grade 9. And the scoring guide that is on the Alberta Education website. And this is what you use when you go to the minister to do the correcting in the summer. This is your Bible. This and plenty of other annotated documents. So they even have, and I don't think I put it here, but I can try and find it. The ones with the exemplars, and I think it is in one of my files, where they really go through each level of student writing and pick out the bits that make it that level of writing. So I'll go over that with you because this needs to be zoomed in anyway. And the first assignment is the narrative, I believe. Is this the narrative? That's the narrative assignment. And so this over here, all these numbers up at the top cross-reference to the learning outcomes in the program of studies. So that also allows us to go back to this document. I might go back and forth and use the numbers that we see here in order to figure out, okay, well, if this is something that this particular student or my class in general has difficulty with, then I can go back to the program of studies, tease out the learning outcomes, and really focus on those. Okay, so that's really helpful in this particular document. And as we read through things like, here, I'll go to organization, vocabulary, conventions, right? Conventions, and this is where, you know, as I sit down with my son and do his writing homework, I tell him, don't spend so much time on your spelling, you know, don't worry about that for now, get your ideas down and then we'll then we'll work on all of that. You know, it's one of the strategies that I give him, but at the same time, we understand how important using the proper vocabulary and the proper conventions are to the essence of the writing that's happening, right? Is the spelling so terrible and the syntax so off that I don't understand where the story is going or what it's about? It's possible. I've corrected texts like that. So each element is important in and of itself. And like I said, if we can pinpoint the learning outcome, and there are very few as we make our way down the line, the content and the organization really have most of the learning outcomes in it. Okay. So those are my starting off points. I'm also going to go back and tease out the copy tip, I think. And if I look at the copy tip, sorry, again, it's taking a little time. The copy tip will be here. All right, so grade 9. And the copy tip. All right, so if we're looking at the narrative essay, it's a whole document. Right, so it really goes over, and I don't know if you've seen this before. If you haven't, it's one of the best documents that's been put together, and it's meant to guide us in the work that we do today. Right, and we also have them for grades 10 and 11, which is very helpful, right? So not just 9 and 12, but they also exist for us in 10 and 11. All right, so they have several student exemplars based on the level of writing it is and the rationale. So it's the rationale that really speaks to us today. Okay, so everybody here in the room has access to this. Okay, good. Because for our purposes, it might be helpful either to print it out or to have it on our own screen. I know I work with 2 screens, so it's much easier for me. We can have it in front of us, but I also like to consider one of our writing samples that we have today. Okay, so I'm going to go through this really quickly. I don't want to make you dizzy, and we're not going to go through all the introductory notes, local marking, and what that all means. Again, here we see the scoring guide and what everything means and how it's cross-referenced to the learning outcomes. And for each part, right, the organization, the sentence structure, the content, vocabulary, and conventions. This was the actual exam for that year. I think this was 2018, if I'm not mistaken. I remember this particular exam and the general observations that we're getting from marking, what the exam means, the history behind why they use this particular prompt. And sorry, here we go. So observations. So in both narrative and essay, responses scored poor or limited in content. This is what we're going to see. So they pull out from the student exemplars. If you want to do nothing and do the same thing over again, like getting a crappy job or just staying home all day and play games or watch TV all day, then you do that if you want to, or you could go on an adventure. If you don't like your adventure, then go find another. So this is a good example of something that would be considered poor or limited in that particular piece of writing. And as we make our way through, and you go back to the rubric and you say, okay, just for students struggling with their thoughts, right? So the content, if I pinpoint that particular sentence or sentences like those in a text for the content, it would be considered poor, right? So that's where I would circle that on my rubric. Questions about how to use that particular document? I think it's fairly straightforward. It's the work itself that becomes more interesting. Okay, so I'm going to go back to our échantillon. And here I have, I'm up to you to decide which one we can look at. No, you don't care. I don't care. I don't know who sent me what. So, there are no names. For me, there's nothing, but it's a grade 9 considered satisfactory. Okay, so do you want to read this on your own? We can each take a minute to read through this particular text. Then we can have our own notes and discuss about what we've, come to a consensus together, what we think. Okay, you all have access. I'll give you a couple minutes to read through it. Okay, I can put it in the chat also if that makes it easier. I think it will. There we go. All right, I'm just trying to get into the rubric now, the scoring guide. All right. Can everybody see this okay? And you've also got access to it. All right, so based on this character analysis essay on this particular student's writing, now it was deemed satisfactory. Let's say we're starting from 0. We have to, situate this particular student for the content he or she used, the content he or she created in their writing. Where would you say we fall mostly? And now sometimes when I look at this, oh, well, there's a little bit of this and there's a little bit of that. And what we're going to end up doing is we'll take basically the average of. Okay. So I want to hear what you have to say. For example, if oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, well, just initially, I think when I look at supporting details, you know, the supporting details for both proficient and satisfactory are relevant and or generic. So in that area for the supportive detail, it gave examples. It could be proficient, satisfactory. It could be bumped to a proficient because they are stated the same. And then when I look at, the differences between the student's purpose, implied or intentional, again, both of those, it's the same criteria. So again, still kind of floating between that proficient and satisfactory. I think wherein it falls for me when reading it was the student's exploration is clear and logical, a satisfactory, as opposed to adept or plausible. It didn't quite hit that proficient when I was reading through it in their exploration of the character, and them as the writer, or them as the writer.
Right. And I would agree with you there. And so when I go back to the text, I can actually find where that is true, right? And for me, it really hits close to the end of the text, where in conclusion, right, the student says, throughout this thrilling story, Lyra has proven herself to be clever, curious, skillful, and developed other character traits such as compassion, courage. That's a great conclusion. However, when I go back to the text, I don't always see evidence of all of those things. The student talks a lot about curiosity, right? So there is intention there. Like you said, it's specific, and there are specific examples drawn from the text. However, in going back here, the exploration of the topic is clear. There's logic there, but it doesn't go into the supporting details are relevant, but there aren't enough supporting details for the statements the student's making, right? So when we talk about, okay, I've just read through it, I'm trying to situate where the student would be. And as I read through proficient and satisfactory, I can see points, but the more I go back and read the text and I pull out the examples, for me, they also happen to sit satisfactory. Does anybody else have anything they want to add as far as content goes for this particular text?
I think this is where it's an advantage having taught the students, because perhaps those topics of curiosity and skill were covered in class discussions. And so then that would make it predictable. But if they weren't, then perhaps I would show some more thoughtfulness on the topic. And so just reading it from the perspective of someone, I have not read The Golden Compass, but I could guess from what she described there which book it was. So yeah, I agree with supporting details are relevant. I didn't get a lot of insight into the book, having not read it. So generic, and the writing is very straightforward, and there's a lot of generalization.
Yeah, I mean, there are some specifics, but not enough to say that this is a level of writing that is proficient. We can easily say it's satisfactory. Now, every time, for me, when I go through this process, I don't stop there and say, okay, satisfactory. You know what? I looked above. Let's look a little bit below too. All right, let's look at limited. Is it limited? Maybe I'm making a mistake here. So the student's exploration of the topic is tenuous and or simplistic. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's tenuous. I'd say the student is demonstrating at least a clear, logical exploration of the topic. Okay, check. The student's purpose, whether stated or implied, is vague. It's not vague. I mean, it's not to the level of always being intentional. There's intention there, but it's more evident than intentional. The ideas presented by the student are superficial and or unclear. Oh no, I think there's clarity here. So far, I think I'm on the right track. Okay? And that to me is the process that goes on in my head, and then I can move on, right? Once I've gotten the content done, I move on to, what is it, organization next. Yeah, so when marking organization appropriate for the grade 9 narrative or essay writing assignment. And now this, of course, this is a character analysis. It's different. We're not dealing with necessarily a narrative essay. We're not dealing with functional writing. It falls in a sort of other character category, but at the same time, I can still use this rubric. The best thing to do, in my opinion, is use a rubric that is designed for this writing situation. Given that for us and our purposes now, that's not what we have, I'm going to ask you, is that what you do in your class? Like, do you use the same types of rubrics, or do you create your own, or do you go looking for them elsewhere to match the sort of writing situation?
I have my own rubrics that I use. I mark papers for a friend of mine who teaches a college course, and so I've lifted some of stuff from his rubrics when it comes to grammar, because especially for grade 12, that's the level I'm trying to get them to. Yep. But last year at the end of the year, I was looking through all of these rubrics and thinking, you know what, maybe I need to adopt these rubrics as my main source of marking, just so that the kids have been consistently marked through the year, and so that they understand, because I show them the rubrics so that they understand what I'm looking.
Great. That's, I mean, whenever we give them a PAT or a diploma exam, they get the rubric right from the get-go. Like, they get the exam, they get the rubric with it. And teaching the students the rubrics for me is step number one. Explicitly teaching them how we use them and how they should use them to guide their writing. Absolutely. So I'm glad that you use this. This is a great foundation, because it gives us the same language, right? Excellent, proficient, satisfactory, limited, and insufficient. And by the way, insufficient is really, I barely put my pencil on the paper. That's insufficient. And we were very, very careful at the ministry level to not call anything insufficient if there was at least some words on the paper that would be considered limited. All right, limited, poor. That's right. And so this is still a rubric that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points, right? And each one broken down. So yeah, a good idea to use this as a basis, but also fun to create your own, because in creating your own rubrics, you're being really specific with your students in terms of, for this particular piece of writing, this is what I'm looking for at all these different levels. And I know that although Franco-Sud is not members of AAC, the Assessment Consortium, all the other Conseils francophones are members, and they do have access to the different tools that exist on that particular site. But even if you're not, if you're from Franco-Sud and you don't have access to all the member parts of the site, you do have access to quite a bit that is free for the public on that website. So I'll be sure to put that also, add that also in what I want to send you or share with you, that particular website. Okay. That covers content. That's only one out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that we're going to be correcting in every single text. It's a long process when we do it like this. goes much faster when you're just correcting through your students' work. But this process for me is important, I think. So we're really looking at the markers should consider how effectively the writing demonstrates focus, coherent development, connections between the events and or details. So here we're connecting to the text that they read, and closure, right? So if we go back to satisfactory to see, okay, is this really satisfactory? What do you notice? Like what do you see from the text?
I think in terms of the content, the word the trigger word for me all the time between the satisfactory and the purpose and the proficient is purposeful or functional.
Right.
And I just always come back to that, you know, even before reading all the other elements. Was it purposeful, or it's simply just, it was functional? This is what goes into an introduction. I've hit all those elements, that general statement, sujet amené posé, all of that. But the purpose of it is where you kind of feel the students, you hear the student voice in the purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I don't hear the student voice when it's a functional, when it's satisfactory. So for me, that was those key words, even just like the functional, purposeful, and then of course, when you for the excellent, you know, the key words are what kind of make or break it for me in terms of my initial evaluation.
Mm-hmm. And so when we go over this particular piece of writing, I'm going back up to the introduction. What makes a great novel is a good plot, interesting dialogue, and well-developed characters. The first sentence to me is rote. It's generic in a sense, right? It's functional. That's true. And I don't hear a student voice, right? So if I tease out that one sentence, that's what I end up with. And we continue reading. Lyra is a perfect example of a well-developed and exceptional character. She has a very outgoing type of personality and is kind-hearted. You know, like all in all, the introduction is well organized, I would say, but it doesn't give me insight into who the person is writing this particular piece of text. Okay. And as we move on, events and or details are developed in a discernible order, although coherence may falter occasionally. Would we say that that's true, or would we say that the coherence is generally maintained?
I would say maintained for sure.
Yeah, I think the student hinges between the satisfactory and proficient for certain things. And that's, I mean, we expect to see that, right? Not everybody's going to, you know, be satisfactory all the way through in all aspects. And transitions. So are they clearly connecting events and or details within or between paragraphs and sentences? Or are we looking for transitions can be very, very explicit, or are they implicit? Are they mechanical? Again, here, I think it speaks to, is it like very functional and we can't necessarily hear the student voice? Or is there real fluidity, like a real flow between? And I'm going to go back. And so there's a nice flow between the introductory paragraph and the second paragraph. I like how she does that, or he, I don't know who. So she ends with Lyra is clever, curious, and skillful. Okay, well, cleverness is a very obvious character trait in Lyra. She can think of some brilliant ideas to trick people. That's a great, that's very fluid. It's lovely. However, it becomes a little bit more secondaire. It becomes a little bit less fluid as we go on. We see where the student loses a bit being in touch with the text that was read. But still teasing out good examples from it, right? So we're just looking at the organization. It's there, but somewhat mechanical. And then the closure, that's the last element in organization. Like I said earlier, the conclusion is well written overall. However, it mentions things that we didn't see in the actual text. So the organization is somewhat lacking in that respect. Would we say closure is related to the focus and is mechanical and or moralistic? I'm even going to go a little bit lower than that. Is the closure abrupt, contrived, and or unrelated to the focus? I think it falls somewhere between the two, right? I think it has elements of both. And so again, we're looking at mostly satisfactory along the way. And then we move on to the sentence structure, and we're looking whether the sentence structure is controlled, the sentence type and sentence length. Are they effective? Are they varied? Or are we just reading like all run-on sentences or all really short sentences? What kinds of sentences are being written? And are we varying our sentence beginnings? Right? You know that if you've read a text and you're bored to death, it's a good sign that it's not very proficient. So as we look through it, can we say, what can we say? That's my question to you.
This is where I find exemplars really helpful, because teaching the whole range of grades, you can start to lose what's appropriate for which grades.
Good point. Excellent point. Okay. And so would we say this is a grade 9 level text for starters? Yeah, the sentence structure that I see is at level. Would I consider this student my strongest student in the class? Probably not. But there's a variety in the sentence length. There is there's meaning in the sentences. There's meaning from one paragraph to another as well. There's a variety in the beginning of sentences. I think that's not bad, right?
This writer tends to have a lot of control over their sentences.
Yeah. Lapses may occasionally impede meaning. Not too much. Like I get it. I see a logical, controlled sentence structure. I'd err on the side of more proficient than satisfactory in this case. Yeah. And then, if we're ever unsure, that's when we would go back into our program of studies. And we would go back and see at a grade 9 level, where should my students be, right? Okay. And then we move on from sentence structure to vocabulary, right? Are the words accurate? Are the expressions meaningful and well written? Are they effective for sending a message? Is the voice and tone of the student there? Is it appropriate? Is it effective? Okay, so now that we've done so much analysis already through the first 3 aspects, we already get a sense. We don't necessarily always have to keep going back to the text. That's the nice thing about this particular scoring guide. That's why I like it. So right away, I can move down to, okay, I'm getting the sense that this is a satisfactory text, but let's look around it. Words and expressions are often used accurately or appropriately, right? There's a nuance between those 2 words, and that'll help me determine. So what would you say?
I'd say her word choice is generally accurate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we can go back and pick out some words. Do we think that this student understood what clever meant? I think so. She uses a particularly good example or examples from the text. And she continues to talk about curiosity. But gets a good sense of it. Right, so they are generally used accurately, not just appropriately. Now, specific words and expressions show some evidence of careful selection and or some awareness of connotative effect, or are we at general words and expressions are used adequately and clarify meaning? Where do you stand on that?
I would almost say often used correctly. I think that was done well. You know, specific words, expressions show some evidence of careful selection. Like I think the student, you know, just in judging from some of the, you know, devising a plan, I think that student went into the dictionary to go find, when you're making a plan, what's the word that you use? Like, so I think there was some intention there, some work that was to be mindful of good selection of words. So in this case, I would say that it would be, you know, more of a proficient than a satisfactory.
Yeah, I was looking at, she explores the underground vault with Roger and together they venture further down, examining all the details. They consumed wine. I had to laugh at that one.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, so I'm with you on that. However, we move further down and we talk about voice and tone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not very distinct. It wants to be there. The student is working towards that.
And maybe this is where, Barbara, where that, you know, feedback, you know, the student did all of these things. And, you know, I mean, whether, you know, we'll assume that the teacher is talking about, you know, student voice and whatnot. So maybe that's where, you know, as the teacher, you would have focused on, oh, hey, so I read your first draft. For your final draft, I really want you to think about your voice. What is it that you, if you met this person, what would you say to me just like this? That's your voice. And find a way to try to get the student thinking about, what do you mean when you say my voice? Well, I'm supposed to be writing an essay in the third person, because they often think my voice means I'm using I, right?
That's right.
So maybe that's where the bulk of the feedback would have to go for the student, and maybe even just suggesting a third draft to this student, saying you're on the bubble of something really good here. You're sitting at a satisfactory, and I think with one more review with and being mindful of that voice tone, let's talk about it, I think you could bump yourself up to a proficient.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
And I think
there.
that for the most part, if you're telling students one more review and you're going to go, you know, upwards, I think they're willing to that effort in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially, I think, when it comes to their voice and their tone. And if you give them the feedback that allows them to make the improvements, it, of course, it's not enough to say, oh, this is what I think you need to work on. It's how do you work on that? How do I create that when, like, I don't know, I'm just doing what I'm told to do. That's often the, right? So how to create tone in a piece of writing when you're working in third person, when you're responding to a text, you can come out, your personality can come through there. Now, I don't see this student in terms of vocabulary being in the limited I see satisfactory with the possibility of moving up to proficient with further copies. And then finally, as we move on to conventions, right, this is where it's the mechanics, the spelling, the punctuation, capitalization. And we can go through it and we can pick out, okay, well, the student consistently makes the same error. Well, that's one error. It's not several errors, right? We have to keep that in mind. Are we seeing a clarity? Is there a flow in this particular response? And so we go back to it. And to me, the spelling is there. The punctuation is there. You know, we're talking about periods, question marks, commas, you name it. Even the quotation marks. And the way that's all done, let's see where this particular student would sit. The quality of writing is sustained through generally correct use of conventions, or the quality of the writing is sustained because it contains only minor convention errors. I think there are minor convention errors.
I would go with proficient on this.
Yeah. Yeah. Any errors that are present rarely reduce the clarity and or seldom interrupt the flow of the response. Absolutely. There's flow there. You read that right through one time. I got stuck in maybe one part, which was a little convoluted, but that's about it. I think there's some proficiency there, and I think that's wonderful, particularly coming from a francophone school. And I always keep that in mind too, because sometimes I'll read texts from students and I can hear that they're thinking in two languages and they're trying to translate, but not in this case. Here, it's very, very clearly a student who's mastering the language. Great job. That was a lot of fun. I love this kind of work because it confirms for me when I work with other people. Oh, okay, yeah, I am on the right track. I can do this kind of thing. So thank you. That was grade 9. Satisfactory. And I think with the time that we have, it's already 11 o'clock. My guess, my thinking is that we move to a whole other level and we do this sort of process once more and see where the time brings us and see what we do from there. Okay, my going ahead right now is really dependent on your needs and what you want to do. Okay. I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to choose, let's take les échantillons.
Could we maybe do grade 12, just because that is the one I am least confident?
I'm happy to do grade 12, yeah. And I always like working backwards, personally, because grade 12 gives us the, oh, this is where they're headed. Right? So if all the things are in place, and this is what it should look like. Okay, I have student examples of writing from 2020, which is the most recent. I like to use the most recent, but it's a 30-2. Would you prefer 30-2 or 30-1? -1? Perfect. Okay. Let's see what we have. So there are many examples. Did I get any samples from you guys? I think so. What did I do with them? They're supposed to be right in here. Those are just the copy tip. There they are. Okay. And these are both -1. Are they Gran Torino and Miracles? Yeah. Okay. Satisfactory or proficient? You know what? I'm going to choose satisfactory, and I'll tell you why. So when I aim for the middle, then I have a lot of wiggle room up and down. And if we have time, we'll look at the proficient one as well. Okay. So you all have access, but I'm going to put the link in here so it's a quick click for you as soon as I get there. Sorry. Sorry about that. Do you ask most of your students to do their writing by hand or on the computer, or is it a choice that they make 100%? I'm just curious.
Barbara, this Miracles, I sent that in. They were only asked to write a paragraph.
Okay.
Whereas the Gran Torino is an actual, I don't know, it might provide more content, but I mean, this was just a paragraph assignment.
I think then I might go with the other one. Although it'll be longer to get through, I like the whole assignment because it allows us to go through the entire rubric. What do you think? Yeah.
Well, and I want to see what this, again, these were like, they had to write a paragraph about each one of the topics that they were given. So it's not written in an essay format.
Okay.
I could provide you, like, I mean, I have them, they're in my Google Docs. If you guys want to look at an actual essay that they had to write. And I haven't reviewed it at all. He just submitted it to me. So we could do that if you want, or you can look at this, or if someone else has an example. I have a CRT in my inbox that I can share with you. I can send to you if you prefer to do that. Like the critical response, you know.
The critical response essay.
Yeah, like the CRT, right? Which is the, yeah, go ahead, Matthew. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I would really appreciate if we could do that, because I'm going to be teaching grade 12 next year, probably. I haven't done it yet, so it would be really good information for me.
Good. Let's do that then. Okay. I'm going to stop the share. I'll go to my email and wait for that to come in, and then I can share that with all of you. I think that'll take us a good amount of time. Grade 12 is a lot more complex, right? That's fine. This is going to be a great exercise for us. That'll take us the time that it takes us, and then we'll wrap up in the end with how we felt about today, what we want to do moving forward, and sort of a timeline and how we can manage that. It's going to come in by email, right, Nicole? Okay, perfect. And the reason I ask about if you get your students to do handwritten work, it's because that was one of the strategies another teacher uses to prevent plagiarism. So she only evaluates written student work when it's done in the school. She gives them time in class. They do it written. They will eventually type it out, but that helps avoid that whole scenario. And apparently,
sorry, Barbara, I sent that. It should be attached to one of the reminder for the.
Yeah, I got that. Okay, I'm just going to go back into our échantillon. I'm going to deposit it right here. That takes no time at all. And then I'll share the link with everybody. So it's the bean trees.
I am torn about handwriting versus typing. Some of my kids work better having to just write it out. They'll just stare at a screen for an hour and do nothing. But if I give them a pencil and paper, others don't even do that. But their final exam, especially in grade 12, is typed now.
It's typed now.
And so I also want them to have that practice.
And when they're doing their final exam on computer, Well, the things are in place to prevent plagiarism, right? Thankfully. So I put in the chat the link to the bean trees. And I'll come back and share my screen again as it loads. Okay, Barbara Kingsolver. I haven't read this one. I love her stuff. Okay, so we'll take a couple minutes and read through it, and then we can discuss using the rubrics.
This is my student. So just so, and I haven't marked it. He just submitted it yesterday. I will consider what you guys have to say in some of the feedback that I'm going to give him when I'm back in class tomorrow. I don't know if you've all finished it. My initial reaction is when students are writing their essays, I'm trying to get them to write as it like outside of the fact that they're referring to the novel all the time. You're not writing about the bean trees. You're writing about the character, the expression of character, the expression of, and in this essay right away, I was flanked with, he's talking about the bean trees as an element in itself. And that would be one of the first initial feedback that I would give to him. Write as if this is not happening within the novel. Don't write to me about the novel. Write to me about the element of the character. Yeah, and I don't know if you guys had that first impression as well, or
definitely that would be the advice I would give my student. Use the novel as the example of it to support your ideas. And when you analyze the novel, you're using the concepts of, in this case, perseverance and fate, right? He talks, or she talks often about perseverance and fate, right? And determining one's own fate. Okay. Well, and so I brought out the critical analytical response to literary text assignment rubric. And this is the breakdown, right? There's thought and understanding, there's supporting evidence, form and structure, matters of choice, matters of correctness. So using those bits of focus, right? When we start with thought and understanding, we need to consider how effectively the student's ideas relate to the assignment, the quality of the literary interpretations to show understanding of the text relative to the topic. Again, we're using the text, but it's the topic that we're more concerned with, right? Okay, and so where do we think this student is situated in terms of their ideas?
For me, I'm seeing that the ideas are relevant and straightforward. I'm on occasion, I see a little flash of, it was thoughtful and considered, but it was just the statement itself was maybe thoughtful, but then it didn't have the backing to make it actually a thoughtful idea. It was just said as a matter of fact.
Right, more literal.
Yeah.
This came from the text. Yeah. And so that's taking that into consideration. It falls into a satisfactory, doesn't it? Right. So where it says ideas are relevant and straightforward, they are. They can also be considered thoughtful, right? There's a thought, there's consideration there. But as I read on, demonstrating a generalized comprehension of the text and the topic. Well, there's competent comprehension even, I would go so far as to say, but then literary interpretations are general but plausible. More likely than literary interpretations are revealing and sensible. That's not the case, I would say, right? And even when I go down and read the limited one, literary interpretations are incomplete and or literal. They're not incomplete, but they hedge more on the literal side, right? And so that's a touchy one. And if we all come to the consensus, that to me is where the student would fall. Are we talking about a proficient writer here, more a satisfactory writer? I think there's the student's on the cusp. Yeah, and we can show them how to make their way up. That's the nice thing. Okay, and I want to pull directly from the text to support what I'm saying. That's our job, right? And so here I stopped and I said, okay, the Bean Trees has an extensive list of characters of all kinds and origins. And it really is a retelling, right? which makes it more literal and less thoughtful and engaging. Okay. All right, and we move on to the supporting evidence, right? We need to consider the selection and quality of the evidence and how well it's used to support, right? How well it's used to employ and develop and synthesize the students' ideas. So now we need to figure out where we stand here.
I think I'm leaning towards satisfactory because the support is general, it is adequate and it's appropriate, but it wouldn't move into well chosen in a perspective. The persuasive way, I think, is.
I also think it lacks persuasion. But here again, I think there's the opportunity to demonstrate to our student what kind of language can be used to persuade, right? What's your idea here? What are your thoughts on this? And how are you going to use the text to persuade us that that concept is legitimate? Any other thoughts on the support? We can go back to the text. I
think I actually, just finishing reading the description, I was like, a sound connection to the students' ideas. I think it is there.
Okay. I love the introduction to this particular text. I just love it. You know, with the definition of what fate is, and then a belief. Some believe their fate is pre-written. And so the text, the elements of the text that are brought in are meant to highlight that. And I think it does that. I think you're right. It's more than just adequate. Okay. And how about form and structure? So we're considering the manner in which the student focuses, arranges, and shapes the discussion in response to the assignment, and how well a unifying effect or a controlling idea is developed and maintained. It's hard to do.
I can see that, you know, the student tried to have one paragraph about a particular character kind of lead into another. Like I can see that he was trying to arrange it and trying to make it flow from one to the next. So I can see that there was a conscientious effort in the form and structure. Just that, you know, that attempt was made, but the ideas and the details didn't necessarily align themselves to give it that purposeful arrangement. Like the validity, let's say, of the ideas and the details they weren't coherent with what the other character was doing to make that seem like it had to be more than just saying, well, she knew the other character opposite to this other character, she was able to manage her life a little bit better. I didn't feel that it was purposeful. I mean, it was straightforward. I could see it, but it wasn't purposeful. Why are you introducing this character in opposition to the other? What was the purpose of that? Explain that. And then develop what it is that you had to say, or like explain what it is that you wanted about this character to say, well, that's why, this is why I use this character in opposition of this one to show this, to demonstrate this idea or concept that the student had.
And that's where I find the coherence falters slightly. And you're right, I would say it's a more straightforward arrangement, right? It's there and it flows, but it have the fluidity of something that's more purposeful from beginning to end, right? So I would agree with that. As we move on to matters of choice, when we're marking our matters of choice, we need to consider diction, choices of syntactic structures, right, like parallelism, balance, inversion, and the extent to which the stylistic choices contribute again to voice here, right? Okay, so let's consider where the student stands.
I think the student sets the stage to have his voice present. Like he gives good examples. He gives you the, what is the, like his topic sentence opens up the door to the particularities of this character. And he gives us examples, but he doesn't weigh in on any of it.
Yeah, that's right.
Doesn't try to connect it to anything contemporary. And I think, so that's where, again, student voice is lacking there for me. So, what about the fact that she saw someone blown up by this and she didn't want to end up, but what is that? Where do you as a student writer in grade 12 fit in and all of that, weigh in on that? And so I found that the student voice wasn't there. And again, that would be something, and, in the pieces of writing that, that I'm presenting or that we're using, obviously then, even for me, and you mentioned that, Barbara, it's like, well, what am I doing as the teacher? So either they're not catching the way I'm teaching using student voice, I'm not explicit enough, or I need to work harder at it for them to get it, because, of the two pieces of writing, neither has really been, that student voice hasn't been present. And
that's what I love about assessment. When we sit down and we evaluate our students, we're faced with, yes, their capabilities, their competence, their everything that they're giving us, but we also see a pattern that when we pick out that pattern, we can adapt our teaching to our students, their needs, and what we see that they're providing us. So I'm going to go back to this text. And what I found from the start of this text is this student, I heard their voice at the start, and it was their story already written before they were born, or did their efforts pay off as they changed their fates? I love that sentence. That to me is an example of a proficient sentence when it comes to diction and student voice. But it starts to falter as we go through. The beginnings of the paragraphs set the student up great, but then we lose a little bit throughout each paragraph. And then by the end, we've kind of lost the voice a bit. So that's where I would stand on it. I would say it's satisfactory with, oh my God, you're so close to proficient. Just what you're doing here, do a little bit further on. Yeah, I think that's a good analysis. And then finally, matters of correctness. Here, we're looking at conventions, right? Sentence construction, usage, grammar, mechanics, all of that stuff. So where do we think this student stands with those conventions?
I would have scored for matters of correctness proficient. You know, and I could extract examples of you know, of good usage, good mechanics, a couple examples of varied sentence structures as well.
That's what I see too. I went right away to proficient. I think the student does demonstrate a correct use of sentence construction. The grammar is there, the mechanics are there. And in fact, that's wonderful. For me, it's always a great sign, right? Because it helps with the fluidity of the text. It helps the reader understand in a clear and concise way all the way through. But more than that, it's like one less thing to have to really struggle with and work on, right? You've got that down pat. Great. Now let's focus on the stuff that's harder to teach, right? It's easier to teach mechanics. It's pretty straightforward. So yeah, I would say that that student is pretty competent when it comes to their communication. And that's great.
I wouldn't go all the way to excellent because there are some awkward presentations of ideas. The sentence structure it's kind of vague, but yeah, the intent is there, the thought is there, and the control.
The control is there, yeah. You feel that control, absolutely. Yeah, I would agree with you. So that's our second piece of writing. I thought that was, honestly, like I said, I love this kind of work. I love this kind of work because it's so important to have consensus when it comes to writing. It allows us to move forward with much more confidence when it comes to our students. Helps us plan better and do all those wonderful things. It's running up on about 11:30 now. And so in the interest of time, and my wanting to really tease out of you next steps and where we want to go, and we don't have to, you know, really resume our discussion. We've been here before. It's all of us, just us. Normally when we do breakout rooms, we want to come together and share all of that wonderful stuff, but we don't have to. What I'd like to know, like I said, what your needs are and what the next steps we can help you take in this process. So now, Marie-Ève, you're going to be teaching grade 12 next year. And I see that's in the back of your head. And that's fantastic. That's wonderful because you have needs. You all do. So now I want to hear them. What are your challenges? What do you want to see next? What can we help you with?
So personally for me, one thing that I find really difficult about teaching English or any language is really the curriculum and how it's made and how general it is. And how to plan efficiently, but also like there's so many resources that it's like how to find the best ones, and then just how to, yeah, it really goes with the planning personally for me. And yeah, because after that it would be time management as well, because like the curriculums are so general, but at the same time there's so much that you need to teach.
Yeah.
So that's been really difficult for me. I think this is a really good process too, though, because we are in such a small school here that it is helping me see where my students are, not just compared to like each other, but really compared to other students. So I think that's definitely important as well. But yeah, for me, it's all with planning.
Okay. That's great. I love hearing that. That's really specific. And for me, when I think about planning, I think about evaluation, I think about resources, right? And when we first started talking about this, these secondary cohorts, those are the three things that came up, right? We talked about from learning outcomes, les résultats d'apprentissage, right? at the upper levels, they want to make sure we're hitting all the marks. We're teaching all the learning outcomes that we need to be teaching, that we understand them so that we can teach them. Great, but how do we do that? And so we worked backwards in our heads, in our planning, and we said, well, evaluation helps us because it allows us to see what our students are doing and what we need them to be doing. So it helps us to plan. And then in our planning, we consider the resources that we use to teach. Well, that to me, that's the trifecta right there. And so I'm glad to hear you say that. That is one of the things that we're going to be aiming to help you with. Okay? And like I said, it all circles back to resources too. And there's no textbook. We're putting it all together.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. Merci, Maria. C'est super.
For me, Barbara, like I said, I've been teaching it now for, a good 10, 12 years, and I see certain tendencies in my students' writing. And so I'm at the specifics of, I have to do more to teach voice, or I have to do more to teach, form and structure. And for me, it's a little bit of the debate of the internal debate of, at the end of the day, my students write this diploma exam. I try to plan all their writing assignments around the type of writing that they'll have to do for the exam. So I know they have to, and they'll see different examples of letters, and we'll do poetry and we'll do all of that stuff. But I make them write very little poetry in grade 12. I look at it a lot when they're, in the earlier years. I'll focus a lot on the literary devices around it, but by the time they're in grade 12, all their writing is kind of funneled towards their diploma exam. And whether that's right or it's wrong, I'm not sure. So I'm at the point of saying, like, I would need like a little 2-hour session on how do you really teach voice? How do you really teach this, not how to, like, that I need a cooked program, but, me reading through documents saying, okay, here, can I detect student voice in good pieces of writing? I need to be able to do that as a teacher in order to be able to teach it.
Yep.
So it's pretty darn specific, but pretty specific in terms of what's expected on the diploma.
Yeah. And
I don't know, like, students take a diploma, they could take the diploma prep courses, and something like, for a teacher, a 30-1 prep course for teachers. And, like, I go through with my students, that's one of the first things that we do is we go through the 2 rubrics that are used to evaluate them on their diploma exam. And then I'll ask them, well, who knows when they say matters of correctness or this diction or voice or stylistic choices? Do you guys know what that means? Because you're being evaluated on it. So when I'm going to use this language as we go through our next 4 or 5 months together, when I say stylistic choices, you need to understand what that is, but I need to teach it as well. So I guess it's kind of like a prep course for teachers who teach a diploma.
And I think that's great. And the good news is we're not the only consortium in town.
Right.
There are 7 of us. And because we're a francophone consortium, a lot less emphasis is put on ELA classes and how we support ELA teachers, which is fine because it exists with the other consortia. So I'm going to do a little research for you, Nicole. And if I can find you something really specific like that, I wouldn't be surprised that there is something already. And I will send that your way. But it's interesting, and it's something that, of course, is going to be talked about when you teach Français also, right? So we can sometimes combine what we do there. And so I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Liz.
This is really helpful for me because last year was my first year teaching for the full year. Before that, I had just been stepping into somebody else's shoes. And so last year, my problem the whole year was, am I being too hard or am I being too easy? and I just struggled all year with trying to decide because I don't want to discourage them. However, I do want them to be used to being held to a standard that is not just giving them an easy out, right? And yeah, they didn't like me at first because I gave them bad marks and they weren't used to that. But what I was looking at was not something that I could give a great mark to. And so that was my first like 4 months at the end of a year. And so then last year we were getting used to each other. They were getting used to my expectations, and I was kind of evaluating where they were at and deciding what I needed to focus on. And so this year, it's more of okay, I get to move on to less basic grammar and more thinking our way through a text, but I'm still growing as a teacher. And so I need to hear this and see more experienced teachers and what they are teaching, what they expect to see.
So I'm going to try and resume this in a way that will give me the language to help you. Right. So there are a couple of things here that I think you're benefiting from and that you can continue to benefit from, and that's networking. Right. And the networking it's like this. For me, this kind of exchange between teachers allows us to see what we're already doing really well, allows us to confirm, okay, that question of, am I being too hard or too soft on them? And move forward with, okay, either I adapt my assessment techniques so that I'm sure then I'm eliminating bias as much as possible and really moving forward with, I'm doing this the right way. And the other thing I would say is just evaluation techniques in general, right? The more we develop those abilities, the more confident we feel moving forward. And it allows us to bring in other concepts like growth mindset. So where you're saying students are taking time to get to know you and you get to know them and you're working out your mojo together, as it were, it's more a matter of you've spent all this time teaching them the growth mindset. I'm sure of it, right? I'm not giving you the best marks, but don't worry, you're going to get there because by me doing this and communicating all of this to you, you're improving. And to me, the goal is not you're 85% at the end of the year. The goal is you've improved, right? And this is a discussion I had with one of my son's teachers who says, oh, your son is getting a 49%. I said, so? It's better than the 40% he had a month ago. I'm okay with 49%. That's an improvement, right? And so that's where I bring in the topic of marks not being the end all and be all, and really focusing on that feedback that we give them so that they see themselves in a position of progress and improvement and will continue to work along that path instead of stopping themselves because it's not perfect enough. I'm never going to be good enough. That is just who I am. I will never be above a grade, 50%, 60%. Instead of saying, oh, whatever the percent is, it's better than the last time. Whatever I'm doing now is better than what I did before. And that whole process of evaluating writing, thankfully allows us to do that. So whether it's they have their first draft and there's feedback and then they do a final draft, or they do a first draft, there's feedback, there's a second draft, there's feedback, whatever time you can put into it is magical. And the investment that you've made today in doing this session, to me means you're going to go back and you're going to be that much more efficient in your practice. And to me, that's part of the goal. I hope that's the case for you, Liz. I hope that, yeah, okay, perfect. So I've noted down all the challenges and the needs that you have. And like I said, we're going to develop something that works for you, or I can at least provide you with the road that you can take on your own. Now, as I say that, and we start to plan perhaps a series or several isolated workshops, is it helpful for you to do this during the school day, or do you prefer to do this at the end of your school day? And we have to take into consideration the fact that subs are a precious commodity.
I feel like my situation is a little special just because I travel to come to Brooks. So I have a 2.5-hour commute every day back and forth.
Okay.
So during the school day is actually better for me because then
Sure.
I'm not here till late at night.
Right. And you're not doing a Zoom from your car. Yeah. I've done that, but you can't focus on two things at once. No. Okay. Good to know. Good to know. How about you, Marie-Ève, Nicole?
For me, same. During the school day is really
Is
best.
preferable.
Is preferable. Okay.
Same.
Good. Okay. And in the interest of being able to offer you something where you can actually participate, because as you can see, there are only 3 of you. There were many other people who signed up but couldn't be here. So they'll watch this later in their own time. Maybe we won't take a half day, maybe we'll take an hour and a half. But regardless, we're going to try and plan with our orientation committee and with our own within our own organization, so that we can provide you with the best setup possible. So you can be there, you can participate, and you can move forward. And by the sounds of it, we may end up doing isolated workshops that will be connected in their own way, but there wouldn't necessarily be the necessity to attend all workshops. You would go according to your needs. Does that sound about right? Okay. And before we leave ourselves today, leave the room, like I said, you've already got a copy of this particular slide deck. You've got all the links, you have access to everything. Is there anything else I can do for you before we break?
You mentioned that you had, I think it was colleagues who have the copy tip for grade 7 and 8.
Yes.
Right?
I have to contact them because I only have in my files for le cours de français. So I'll contact her, she'll get them to me, and I will get them right to all of you. I will send them to everybody who came or registered for the session.
That would be great.
Okay, good. All right. Thank you for reminding me of that.
And maybe I'm misspeaking for Marie-Ève, but, you know, sometimes it's nice to share, you know, and not that we're trying to, you know, find an easier way to do things, but sometimes it's nice to look at another teacher's like long range plans just for scope and sequence. Like I think of Marie-Ève that, you know, if you're teaching a language class for the first time, there's so many elements. And sometimes if someone, you know, at university or whatever, you know, they'd always share, this is what a great yearly plan looks like. If there was something that existed for, you know, like that you might have a copy tip of something like that we could build on, or that, you know, even I could adjust with, or Marie-Ève, you know, and it's not because you're trying to get out from doing one, you're trying to see how much time do I really have to do what I have to do. So more the scope and sequence element.
I'm a big believer when it comes to education, specifically, that the work that we do, right, all the work that I've done in my life for planning, whatever I've done, to me, that's public, and it should be public. We should be sharing with each other. We shouldn't be reinventing the wheel each and every time. I think that makes us much less performant, makes us less efficient at what we do. And the more we can collaborate and come together and share what we do have, the better it is for all of us and our students. And so thank you for that, Nicole, absolutely. And if you like, and I always put my participants in blind CC, but if you would like to contact each other, I could just put you in CC on my email. You can see each other's email addresses and connect with each other. I would really love it if the next time we saw each other, I would hear somebody say, oh yeah, we discussed this, we exchanged a few emails, we talked about a few ideas together, we even planned a unit together, that kind of thing. So if you're okay with that, I will put you in CC on my email. Thank you. I just want to thank you. I really want to thank you for today. I was a little bit nervous because, like I said, I've taught ELA before. I'm good with it. I'm very comfortable, but at the same time, you know, you never know who you've got in front of you, how it's all going to work out. And this was a beautiful session today. I really, really appreciate your time, your participation. No closed cameras. We're all here together for each other. So on that note, I'm going to say bon appétit. Enjoy your lunch. Have a great rest of your day. Have a wonderful holiday as we come up to it. I probably won't see you until the new year. So until then, be well. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Thank you.
Merci, bonne journée.